All right, the doors have closed. We are ready here. How is everyone? Good stuff. Okay, so we're here today to talk about basically about growth hacking. Who here has heard about growth hacking or exposed to whatever that means? Great. Okay, so some of you. Great. So this is an interesting topic for me. It's an interesting opportunity for me. Growth is, especially in tech and startups and whatnot, growth is very hot, very sexy. It's something that I'm really passionate about, but it's also something that is unique for audiences like this, audiences of small businesses or people working with small businesses. And I think, the growth hacking is pretty young. It's about a decade old. I think the word growth hacking itself was coined in like 2007 or 2008 or something. So, we have basically 10 years of collected experience, only 10 years of distilled experience, right? That we've distilled down to best practices. And those best practices have never really been subjected to, what I consider a really meaningful test, which is how well do these principles generalize to and resonate with other kinds of audiences, right? And how effective are practitioners like myself able to drive value for other types of companies, other types of practitioners themselves using these principles. So I think that's what we're trying to do here today, and I'm really excited about that, and hopefully you guys are as well. So a couple of things. Let's see. Okay, great. So structure for today, we'll kick off with basically talking about how we approach growth hacking as kind of a process, as a framework at Infusionsoft. We'll open up for some questions, and then if time allows, we'll workshop a little bit of a growth process. So taking a step back, a little bit about me. So my name is Abi. I am the Director of Analytics at Infusionsoft. So my job is really to help Infusionsoft derive value from its data, right? So my department works on collecting data, on piping it into data warehouses, on doing data science and data analysis on it, and serving it up to end consumers. So that is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart and very related to growth as well. So happy to talk about that more in detail later. But another part of my job at Infusionsoft, another part of my professional experience in the past decade has been working in growth and growth hacking. So at my last company, I co-founded and co-led the growth team. And we ran that growth team for about a year, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looked like. But it was basically a year of running and experimenting and iterating. And when we started, we had about a 1% growth rate. In the last 4 months, we were able to unlock enough value to get from basically 5% to 15%, which is not trivial, right? 15% net month-over-month growth rate, basically applying the process, right? Applying the process we're going to talk about today. It's really that simple. So what was the secret to our growth, and what's actionable from that? So first of all, let's talk about what growth isn't. So growth isn't about hiring specialists, right? That's a lot of what the hype about growth is, and certainly Silicon Valley, which is that there are growth hackers or growth marketers or growth analysts. It's not about hiring specialists. It's not about initiatives either, right? It's not that I have some kind of lofty initiatives that I've planned out for a quarter and I'm going to execute against these big initiatives. And it's not a silver bullet, right? There's not one thing. Unfortunately, I wish I could give you one silver bullet, but unfortunately there's no one silver bullet, right? In short, it's not about the answers, it's about the question, as trite as that sounds. And what growth really is to us is it's a muscle. It's a muscle, it's a way that we apply a framework to approach business processes. And we build that muscle in a really simple way. We have a process that we commit to, that we're disciplined to, that we stick to. We experiment in a structured way. We measure and learn in a structured way. And then we lather, rinse, repeat, on and on and on until we 3x growth. Okay, great. So thanks for your time today. That's it. No, great. So now we're gonna spend some time dissecting really what this looked for us and what it's looked for us at a couple different companies. So our growth framework. So 3 elements: process, experimentation, and measuring and learning. So let's start with process. So for us, process looks like a couple of things. It's mapping a funnel, setting goals to improve against those opportunities that we've identified in the funnel. It's ideating, and it's prioritizing. So let's get started. So this is the longest section for good reason. So process, is one of these, these things that make your eyes glaze over, right? And it also seems very pedantic. It's process. How hard could that be? And, I think if there's one thing that we've learned in, a decade of best practices around growth, it's that the most potent filtering function in general for whether a startup is going to succeed at its growth initiatives or whether it isn't is just about discipline, right? And discipline is hard, but it's vital, just like in all things in life. And it's just about, are these startups actually, and are these companies for that matter, actually committing to the discipline of following a set process? And that's the kind of process we're going to be talking about today. So first we map our funnel. First step of the process to map our funnel. Who's seen a funnel like this before? Great, so this is known by many terms. It's called a lean marketing funnel here, the growth marketing canvas and other places. My preferred moniker for this is the pirate funnel, because the acronyms spell out R. So that's attention at the top, acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. And the great thing about this funnel is when you really look at this funnel, this describes basically the core full funnel for virtually any business, right? Whether it's a restaurant or a startup or an online marketing business or a partner org or anything like that. So let's take an example. If I am a small business consultant, consulting for other small businesses, my attention is up there. It's the number of people that know about me, that have word of mouth, that it's my exposure in the marketplace. My acquisition might be people that actually come on my website and convert. My activation might be that they actually subscribe to a mailing list, for instance. My retention might be that they retain on that mailing list. My revenue might be how much value I get from those people. And my referrals are obviously do those customers bring on new revenue, right? And you could apply the same framework to, like I said, you could apply it to a restaurant. We apply it to Infusionsoft. You could apply it to any kind of business you can think about. And what's great about this is the high-level funnel, and at every individual constituent component, there's also a zoomed-in funnel, right? So if I were to just focus in on acquisition, funnels exist for every process, right? So if I'm that same small business consultant, if I just zoom in on my acquisition funnel, I might have a very simple funnel that looks like this. It looks like people come, they visit my website, they sign up for a mailing list, and then eventually I have some kind of a sale, right? Just zooming in, funnels exist for every process. This is just the process for, let's say, acquisition. And it's really important to understand this, and it's really important, as pedantic as it is, to actually draw out this funnel. A, because it helps you understand the leakages and the opportunities here. But B, it really helps you understand what your business process is, right? In a way that maybe tacit to us, but maybe hasn't been crystallized. So here we have a 50% drop off from visits to sign up, but an 80% drop off from signups to sale opportunity, right? That might be where we target. And I think, in thinking about our own businesses or for the businesses that we help for customers of ours, for clients of ours, this is really the first step, right? Do we understand our funnel? Then, simply, we just set goals to improve that funnel, right? We use historical data and we set, SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, time-bound. We set SMART goals that make sense for us, that are stretch goals as well, against opportunities that we've already identified in the funnel. So in our case, we just identified the opportunity as sign up to sale. If that's where we want to focus, then we can look at our historical data. Historically, our conversion is around 22%, right? In keeping with that 80% drop off. And this is all pretty steady historically. So we're going to set a stretch goal for, let's say, 26%. So we've identified an opportunity, we've set a goal. Then we ideate, right? So this quasi-mathematical formula that we've just made up is basically ideas are inspiration plus knowledge plus focus, right? Inspiration makes sense to us. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can impact outside of maybe microdosing, which is also popular in tech now. But inspiration is not something we can really impact much, right? Knowledge is how well do we understand our customers? How well can we search the problem scope? How well can we search the market scope for how I can address this with experimentation and growth strategy? But focus is actually maybe the most actionable, right? And focus is how and where do I point my mind's eye in terms of understanding how I should apply my inspiration and knowledge to come up with ideas. And the takeaway here is we want to focus on radically different ideas, ideas that are as different as possible, especially in small business stages. And I think this graph does a great job of showing that. So, if we were omniscient, this is basically, let's suppose I sell widgets, right? And I can sell widgets for some price. And here are discounts going down this axis on the horizontal, and basically sales. If I was omniscient, I could tell you that for every $1 of discount, this is the total number of sales I'm going to have, right? Unfortunately, I'm not omniscient. And if I start here, if I start at $30, and I don't think big enough, and I just want to experiment and I want to grow, what I would do is I would probably test, okay, I'm at $25, let me test a $30. Let me test a $40, let me test a $50. And I would do that, and I would do a $20, a $30, and a $50. And where I would end up is the $20 worked somewhat, the $50 didn't work as well, and the $30 worked the best. And I would end up optimizing, and I would end up on this little hill here. And that would be fine, except that I would miss the highest peak, right? The highest possibility for me was actually at the 110. So what I've literally done here is I've mistaken a hill for a mountain, right? And the reason that happens is because I'm thinking too small. When you're thinking small and you can't run infinite numbers of tests, if I can only run 3 tests, where should I run my price tests? I should run them at maybe 20, maybe 100, and maybe 300, right? Immediately I'll know, immediately I'll learn what the possibility is that I'm actually on a mountain as opposed to a molehill. And that leads to us, testing radically, right? Ideate radically, focus your mind's eye in terms of brainstorming on radically different possibilities, so to limit the possibility of under-optimizing. This is a classic example of what we don't want to be like. So this is Google. Is everyone familiar with this test? So this was a famous test that Google ran a few years ago, 41 shades of blue. So that's the old logo, and that's the new logo. I don't know about you, but I can't tell the difference. But apparently people could. And Google ran millions and millions of people through this, right, before we have our morning coffee. And they can do that because they have 1 billion visitors a day. And they're able to test micro variations to end up with some kind of optimality. And they find that, this new Google logo, 41 shades of blue later, produced, some incremental click lift, and so that's what they've done, right? We obviously don't have that luxury. Let's take an example with Infusionsoft. So here was Infusionsoft's website a few months ago. So if we're going to go 41 shades of blue, we would do a CTA test here, and which we all are probably fairly familiar with. We would maybe test our 20 versions of green, or maybe we'd test simply just red, green, and blue and call it a day. A better test, keeping with our notion of we want to do global optimizations and not local optimizations. We want to find mountains and stay on those instead of molehills. Would be maybe something like this. So our original is, the original CTA, Discover Infusionsoft, and our radically different, or somewhat radically different test is watch a video, right? Don't sign up, don't try and get information. Watch a video instead, connect via video, and also we'll anchor by giving you the possibility to connect directly to the product specialist. So you can skip our traditional demo flow entirely and you can go right into a demo. A radically different test, we didn't actually do this, but a radically different test that shows you, am I optimizing on a local maxima or am I optimizing on a global maxima? Great, so we've focused, we've ideated, we've identified our opportunities, and now we're coming up with a bunch of ideas, and the next step is, can we concretize those ideas with hypotheses that are well structured. And this too, a lot of this sounds very pedantic, very simple, like, okay, I get it, hypotheses, but future Abhi thanked past Abhi for properly crafted, properly parametrized hypotheses, because our framework for coming up with hypotheses at Infusionsoft is we believe that we can increase X by Y because Z. right? And that immediately capitalizes on what you believed, what that gain was, and what kind of metric you were trying to track. And when these fit across your entire space of ideas that you're trying to target, this becomes really powerful and becomes a really powerful way of tracking this over time. So we believe that we can increase, in the early example, we believe that we can increase the conversion rate of first-time visitors to the lead form, that was our landing page test, by 50% by changing the copy to more active verbiage on our landing page. We believe we can increase X by Y because Z. Great. So we have our ideas, we have our hypotheses, and we have a list of hypotheses now across different ideas. And now the question is, how do we prioritize? And also, why do we prioritize? So why do we prioritize? A is bandwidth, right? We can only do so much. We can only run so many of these hypotheses, so many of these experiments. B, interpretability. If I run 100 different tests on my landing page, how do I know which one is actually driving the lift in the bottom of the funnel, right? And C is statistical significance, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But really, the reason is speed. So I've talked to a lot of VCs over the years, and the one thing that really struck with me, the one quote is this one, which is that healthy hockey stick growth is getting from one information event to the next as fast as possible. Startups that succeed learn fast. They learn, and they exploit those learnings to gain unfair advantage in the marketplace against people that don't learn. Companies that learn fast grow faster. Companies that learn slow grow slower, right? Startups and growth and companies in general, company growth is about getting from one information event, something I know about my customers or about the marketplace that I can exploit, to the next as fast as possible. So it's about speed, which really comes to why we prioritize, right? For speed, and for that end, be dramatic, have courage, and if we fail fast, and failing faster is learning something too, and that's learning faster. All right, so how do we prioritize? Now that we know why, how do we prioritize? So the framework we use at Infusionsoft is ICE. Has anyone used ICE before? Okay, so ICE is fairly straightforward, right? Impact, confidence, ease. So I have a bunch of hypotheses, I have a bunch of metrics that I'm testing against. How do I know which one I should target first? I measure it across 3 dimensions. Impact, if this idea works, how big of an impact will it have? Confidence, how sure am I that this could actually work? And ease, how difficult is this to implement? How costly is it? How many man hours does it take? How many dollars does it take to implement? How expensive is it? And then we simply just ice the backlog. So in this case, we have 7 experiments or 6 experiments. The hypotheses aren't on here, but they're briefed separately. And we literally just go through. We denote this on some kind of a backlog. We have some kind of prediction for lift. We have a metric that extends from our goal, and we have a category that's basically our pirate metric category that speaks to our full funnel, and then we simply ice it. We're a 4 in terms of impact out of 10 based on some normalized scale that Infusionsoft uses for the predicted impact. We're 3 on the confidence scale, and then we're in ease. And then you can use this in many different ways. Some companies use this as simply something that's added together, like here. I think what makes sense for me and what we're doing at Infusionsoft is actually to multiply I times C and subtract the effort. So impact times confidence is kind of like an expected value, right? It's the expected outcome I'm going to get, and then the cost is ease. So just subtract out the cost from impact and confidence, and that's how we prioritize Infusionsoft. But there are different ways that you can look at this as well. So ice the backlog. And then we execute, right? And then we just execute. So we have our ideas, we follow the process, and we know what we want to target, which hypotheses we want to work on, and then we execute. So then we get into the later stages in our flow, right? So we talked about that process, and this is the process. That's a discipline we want to keep ourselves to. The rest is experimenting, measuring, and learning. So experimenting and measuring. So we'll start with execution considerations. So who here has run A/B tests before? Okay, so a lot of you. So we'll talk about a few execution considerations that are probably familiar to you and maybe not to some others. Consideration number 1, sampling bias. if I'm going to run an A/B test, the only way that an A/B test is really viable is if I know that the difference between my A group and my B group, my sample and my control, my treatment and my control, is actually driven by the test, and only by the test, right? So to take this example, I mean, the cartoon is cute, you guys can take a look, but to take the case of Infusionsoft, we can't run the green button if we were going to make, a green button, blue button CTA test. We can't run the green button in California and the blue button in New York, right? Because there are other things happening probably that distinguish how those two populations are going to convert. So the only thing that's changing is not the CTA, and if that's not the case, then our ability to interpret what's really happening, what's really driving this change is obfuscated. Number two, don't run too many tests, right? So here's another graphical example. Basically, if I run multiple tests, then it's hard, then it's not just one thing that's changing, right? If I'm in 4 different tests, even if everything else is equal and I was randomized into my treatment and control group, if I'm in 4 different tests, then actually I'm in 3 other tests that are different from people that are a different group of tests than the people that are in my same group now. And those tests might impact the same metric that I'm in right now, right? So if you don't have high sample sizes, don't overtest. Again, going back to prioritization, test big instead of testing more. Test big tests, test faster, but don't overtest, and we call this collision. Number 3, tests don't need to be run 50-50. This is a common thing that people don't utilize enough. So our example here is Infusionsoft wants to test a new upsell strategy. We will delete 1 lead per day. Trust me, this is not a real idea. We will delete 1 lead per day from any customer's account that refuses to pay an additional $200 a year. Should we run this test against a control of equal size? The answer is obviously from the left or no, right? But if it's an interesting test, it's an interesting concept. It's a risky test, I think we recognize that. And what we can do to hedge against the risk is to not run an equal test. So we can run this test. We're completely within our bounds to run this test on 10% of the population. So the control group gets 90% of the people, and that 90% doesn't have the test, and only 10% get the test, and then we can monitor. We can monitor slowly, and if there's existential impact to the business, then we can cut the test. If things are going well, though, the trade-off is it will take us longer to know for statistical significance, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. The last is the most common execution mistake that people make, which is to test pre-post, right? This example is that here, there's a mixed panel event. There's actually a button that people are clicking on the website, and this is real data where 1 week it's up 6.4%, another week it's down 9.3%, and then it's up 4%. Nothing changed. Nothing about the app changed during that week, right? During that time. Pre-post will lie to you. Pre-post is saying I did something one way, and now I'm going to test on instead of A/B testing, I'm going to roll this out, and I'm just going to see what happens. The problem is time series change, right? There's natural fluctuation. A lot of things are happening in the real world. It's not apples to apples. Pre-post is alluring, but generally it's scarcely worth doing unless you absolutely have to, because time series fluctuate without doing anything at all. Okay, so those are some basic experimentation considerations. We can talk more in the Q&A. So let's get into a few measurement considerations as well. So measurement consideration. Number 1, measure properly, right? Statistical significance or it didn't happen. So we're not going to get a deep dive on statistics here. We're not going to get into too much mathematical formalism. But we are going to talk about basically what is statistical significance from an intuition perspective. How big should my test be? And how do I know if I've hit significance? Okay, so stripping away all the jargon, the common sense explanation is statistical significance is the likelihood that the difference in conversion rates between a given variation, my treatment, and the baseline, my control, is not due to random chance. So the common sense way to interpret statistical significance is that if I have 90% significance, there's a 10% chance that my result is actually random or chance, right? That this is not actually, actually a real effect. To make that example illustrative, let's suppose we have another test here where I have my original website and my new website. So in my original website, I have 9,000 people that see that website. I have 100 conversions, and my conversion rate is 1.1%. On my new website, I have 10,000 people that see it. I have 90 conversions, and my conversion rate is 0.9%. Is the test or control better? Does anyone know off the top of their heads? The answer is neither, right? The answer is that they're not statistically different. But it's really hard to tell. It's impossible to tell. How would I even be able to tell, right? And that's statistical significance. That's the notion of statistical significance. And I think, one of the ways that I've described this in the past is that in terms of describing randomness and all that kind of stuff is coin flipping, right? If I have a fair coin, what's the probability that that fair coin is going to land on heads? 50%, right? But if I flip that coin 4 times, I'm probably not going to get 50%, right? There's a very good chance that I would get 3 out of 4. If I flip it 5 times, there's a very good chance, 6 times, there's a very good chance it won't be, 50%. 10 times, a very good chance it won't be 50%. It's not going to be 50% until enough of the randomness is washed out, right? Life is random, there's a lot of randomness. With more and more and more trials, I wash out the randomness. If I flip the coin 1,000 times, I'm going to be pretty darn close to 50%, right? But if I flip it 6 times, probably not. Statistical significance is a way for us to quantitatively measure, without going into the details, is a way for us to quantitatively measure the extent of randomness that I've washed out, right? If I do this for long enough, how confident can I be because I've flipped this coin for long enough? If I've only flipped it 6 times, how doubtful should I be because I haven't flipped it enough? That's what statistical significance is really trying to tell us mathematically. Okay, so assuming, hand wavy, assuming that we know what statistical significance is and we know that it's meaningful, we need to set our sample sizes beforehand, right? Because otherwise, I could flip my coins, or at least it would be good practice to know how big my sample should be, right? Because otherwise, if I had a coin, and I wanted to know whether it was a fair coin, how would I know how long to flip it? Do I flip it for 6 flips? Do I flip it for 1,000 flips, right? So what we do is we preset the sample sizes. So there are many, many tools here. We can use this one. So let's just go through a little bit of how this one works. It's fairly straightforward. Okay, so here's a basic. This guy is extremely influential, Evan Miller. This calculator is very widely used. So here is a basic run of how many subjects I should need to be confident at some level, right? And it's really easy to use. So number 1, I need my baseline conversion rate. So I have a website, I'm trying to improve my conversion. So I want to know actually how many samples do I need for that test we spoke about earlier about the Infusionsoft landing page. So I know that my baseline conversion rate on that website is, let's say, 5%. And then we get to this minimum detectable effect. Now minimum detectable effect, does anyone know what MDE means? So minimum detectable effect is what is the minimum size of the impact at which I care, right? If I say to myself, I only care if this test is successful if it has a 10% lift. If not, I don't care. Then I actually need fewer samples. If I only want big impacts, then I actually need fewer samples. If I want smaller impacts and I want to know that this is better by 1%, then I need more confidence. So in this case, I want to know in absolute terms, I only care about this test as successful if it's absolutely, the absolute is toggled, if it's absolutely better by 5%, which means it's 5 percentage points better, which means that the only way that this will show me that something is significant is if my test outperforms and it's converting at 10% or higher. So if I do that and I go down and I say that my significance level, my confidence is, let's say, 10%, right? That's the negative, that's the inverse of my confidence level. 10% significance level alpha over here, all that's saying is that's the randomness, that's the uncertainty I have. So I'm saying I'm willing to be only 90% confident. I'm willing to be 10% in doubt. If I set those parameters, somewhere there's a button here, surely. Let's see. Can anyone see the button? Got it. Cool. Thanks. So let's say 10%, and wow, that's really bad UX. Does it come up now? Nope. Okay. So baseline conversion at 10%, minimum detectable effect at 5%. I need about 480 people, right? For me to be 90% confident that my treatment is better than my control, I need about 480 people in each. So I can do the math, I can understand, I get about 100 people per day, I need to run this test for 5 days. Is that something I'm willing to do? Maybe. If it is, then I'll run the test. If not, then maybe I'll think bigger, or I'll change some of these parameters, or I'll be willing to take less confidence. Okay, so practically, how big should my test be? As large as possible. The minimum sample size we should try and determine through something like this calculator. Alternatively, if I can't meet that minimum, I have two options. I can either run tests with more extreme changes, bigger changes, so I only care about bigger effects, or I can look up the funnel, right? If I'm targeting the conversion funnel from going back to our earlier example, if I'm targeting my conversion funnel over here, and what I'm targeting is sign up to sale. Well, signups already have a lower denominator here, right? Signups, I'm only getting 500 signups to begin with. And if I don't have enough sample because I'm constrained by the number of signups, then maybe my test should actually go up the funnel where I have more sample. So maybe I should actually be testing at the visit stage instead of the sign up stage, which will actually enable me to do some kind of test. Okay. Great, so we have that, we look at our sample size, we make our sample size, and then we execute our test, and then how do I know if I've hit significance? Okay, so tips for calling a test. Number one, it depends on the confidence required. So the rule of thumb is, that really came from academia, is that you want to be 95% confident, right? Now that, for practical purposes, may be unreasonable. When you're coming up with a cancer drug, you want to be 95% sure that that works. When you're testing a CTA, I think we can deal with a little bit less. So at Infusionsoft, practically we go no lower than 80% confidence and preferably 90% confidence. But to try and shy away from that 95%. The second thing that's really valuable as you're looking at your own business or business of your clients is it's often valuable to report these results in terms of expected value, right? The same way we talked about expected value in terms of impact times confidence, it's also extremely valuable to think about these experiments and how valuable they are to productize as what was my confidence threshold? Was I 80% confident? Was I 85% confident? And what was the expected impact? So if I have an 80%, if I'm only 80% confident, but I'm 80% confident of the test actually increasing LTV by $1,000, then $800 LTV impact might be good enough for me to implement this, even though I'm less confident, right? Because the impact is so large. So it might be helpful to think about it in terms of expected value. So how do I actually know if I've hit significance? Well, I'll use this tool, and there are a lot of tools out there, but this tool under the hood, and this is very much outside the scope of our conversation today, but under the hood, the way this tool works allows you to peak. So traditional A/B testing, you're not supposed to keep looking at your results because you might prematurely call it, right? I might prematurely call my quarter as unfair if I've only flipped it 6 times and it comes up 5 to 1. So that's one of the reasons why we don't peak. Under the hood, this allows us to relax that assumption a little bit, and this also works very, very easily. So my control, let's say I ran a test. My control had 1,000 people in it. 50 people converted, 50 people clicked that button on a landing page. My test had, let's say, 800 people in it, and 70 people converted on that page. If I just calculate, I get these neat graphs, and I can share them with people, and I at least look smart, right? And which is half the battle. and it tells me right here this neat, very easy to interpret schematic about how I actually performed. So in this case, it says the approximate probability that the test performs better than the control is 99.8%, right? So very confident. And it also gives me the expected absolute change, which I can use for expected value. And it also gives me a clear recommendation. End the experiment, implement the test variant. End the experiment, I'm very confident, implement the test variant. So it's very neat. So there are a lot of tools out there. This one will scale gracefully to your needs. Okay. Great. So we've run the experiment. We understood whether it's significant or not. Our next steps are to track the tests and share the learnings. So tips here are, whatever the size of company that you have or that you're working with, is to build and maintain a simple test document, just like we had the hypothesis tracker. Dashboard, your key metrics, create a space to share results, and keep updating the backlog. So I think we have an example. No, we don't have an example of our backlog. In our company, we have a backlog that looks something like like this. So this is actually a version of the backlog that we used to use. And if if we saw more of the screen there, this backlog has the full hypothesis, the next steps that we recommend based on the results, and future tests and learnings that we can glean based on how this went, right? So maintaining a simple backlog. Okay. Great. So, and then last is accelerate testing to learn faster. Continue to increase the speed bar. Now that we've built the process and discipline, you can relax it a little bit. Test bigger and continue to test not more at the same time, but more in terms of rapid iterations. Okay, a common rule of thumb, so there was a survey of growth hackers 5 or 6 years ago, and then another one about a year ago about this kind of test to impact ratio, and the overwhelming consensus, 80% of them said basically this, that the ratio is around, you need 15 to 20 tests, 15 to 20 experimentation cycles to find 1 or 2 major improvements, right? So that's a lot of iteration, that's a lot of quick growth, and empirically this is what seems to be basically true for us. Which in conjunction with this really speaks to the need to move fast, right? How do we break down 30% annual growth? We can have one runaway success with 30% lift, which basically never happens, right? You can have 12 monthly wins of 2.2%, or you can have 52 weekly wins of just 0.5% that compound, right? 52 small wins, because big wins are tough, 52 small wins compounds to 30% annual growth, right? Which is really compelling. And those are the ways that we achieved that kind of net growth at HoneyBook as well. It's small wins week over week over week, increasing the test speed bar, increasing testing frequency, and testing big. So get testing, and we're here to help. So I am available. So I manage a lot of the testing at Infusionsoft, and I manage a lot of the growth process here at Infusionsoft. Feel free to connect with me after, and we can talk about consulting for how we can run tests better for you or your clients. We can open up to questions. You can get the slides. I think we're handing the slides out. You can probably email one of the coordinators, or you can connect with me after this, and I can share them with you. Yes?
Do you post your successes and kind of what it was? So
Do we?
do you actually go out there and go, hey, we changed the button from green to purple, and now it was awesomely successful.
Yep.
Changed it to red, it didn't work, or something.
Yep. So different teams do it differently. We're trying to, right now, the question was, do we post our successes? And the idea is that backlog has everything. That backlog has that we talked about has all the hypotheses, all the experiments that were run, and then the results. So if they were successful, they're successful. If there were failures, there were failures.
But do we as partners actually see that backlog, or is that
no.
just an internal document?
No, so you'd like to know some of the tests that we've run. Yeah, sure. We can connect. There are a lot of different teams that are doing testing. We're happy to connect. You can also email me directly, and we can share some knowledge. Yep. Any other questions? Yep, in the back over there.
What do you recommend for smaller companies that may not have the traffic or velocity to get results in any kind of timely fashion, or how do you handle that with a site that might only be getting 1 to 5,000 views a month?
No, I think that's a good question. I think we've talked about some elements of that throughout, right? I think it comes down to plan for bigger tests, right? Again, going back, the most meaningful thing that reduces the number of sample sizes you need is the size of the effect that you're willing to tolerate, right? If you will only call a test a success if it's 10% better than as opposed to 5% better, you actually need, that's double the impact, right? And actually the number of samples that you need scales quadratically, so you actually need a fourth of the samples if you double the impact. So if you just test bigger, test largely disparate things, radically different things, and test large things, large scale interventions that you think will have high impact and only tolerate high impact, that's one approach. The other approach is to test upstream in the funnel, right? So again, if I have low traffic, I probably can't test bottom of funnel. I probably can't test, if I have a 4-stage funnel, I probably can't test step 3 to 4, but I might be able to test step 1 to 2 because there's fall-offs at each level, right? So approach number 2 is to go upstream. And approach number 3 is to use a calculator like the one that we shared, because those kind of calculators allow you to peak. And so you can peak a little bit more and you can get to convergence faster potentially. If you start to see trends, as opposed to the traditional way, some of us may have learned testing, which is you can't peak at all. You have to wait until you have the number of samples, and then you just basically never run tests, right? If you're tolerant of a framework that allows you to peak, that might lead to convergence faster. You might be able to learn quickly.
Thank you.
And those are all issues that startups have too. Infusionsoft does too, right? We can only run so many tests because even we only have so many samples to work with. Any other questions? Okay. All right, great. That is it. Thank you so much, and we're around if you have any other questions about running tests.
Part of the growth hacking team, sorry. And, whoa, this is really powerful stuff. And